It's William Friedkin's birthday as I write this, and I find myself thinking a great deal about the recently departed filmmaker. Friedkin's death on August 7th, 2023 was a tremendous loss for film culture. Not only the death of a great director, but also a lost link to the new Hollywood cinema of the 1970s. The one silver lining when a great artist passes, however, is the renewed appreciation of their art, and Friedkin was no exception. Social media quickly flooded with tributes, ranging from hilarious screenshots and clips of Friedkin's rather blunt style of interviewing.
If you think that's a masterpiece, what is Citizen Kane?
It's great, but it was an inexpensive movie, so financially...
Who gives a shit?
To the more emotionally stirring, like James Gray's touching anecdote about his last dinner with Friedkin. Amidst formal obituaries outlining the director's life and career, there has also been, more simply, lots of movie fans sharing their favorite parts from Friedkin's filmography. Whether honoring his most iconic and influential films, or flag-waving for his more divisive and fraught works, there has been, amongst cinephiles, an overall celebration for the cinematic achievements of William Friedkin. For my part, I made a point to rewatch The French Connection, which is probably still my favorite Friedkin movie. The film is deceptively simple, a cop movie about the pursuit of a drug dealer, stripped of any excess in plot or characterization. There is no home life for Popeye Doyle, or trite buddy movie melodrama between he and partner Cloudy Rousseau. Just two men defined by their job and how they do it. Friedkin's depiction of driven professionals characterized by their work predicts the films of Michael Mann, but without the latter's slick sense of cool. Instead, The French Connection is dirty. It's New York covered in trash and decay, captured by a handheld camera, which consistently jitters and shakes. It is a deadly arena for the chase, at times literally, as in the rightfully iconic set piece where Doyle tails a runaway train in a commandeered car. The sheer ferocity of the scene, with the camera strapped to the hood of Doyle's car as it barrels through congested streets, swerving and crashing against pedestrians unexpectedly caught in the chaos, is so extreme that it has overshadowed the film itself to some extent. Make no mistake though, all of The French Connection moves with this same urgency. I call the film deceptively simple because as you watch it, it can feel like just a series of action scenes and procedures held together by the propulsive drive of the filmmaking. The French Connection is constantly moving forward, not leaving much time for the viewer to reflect. But the movie's sudden ending brings that forward momentum to a crashing halt. Popeye's paranoia gets an ally killed, and following 100 minutes of relentless pursuit, the film concludes on a bold anticlimax. As the darkness and uncertainty set in, title cards reveal the fate of the film's villains, quietly wondering what any of this violence was really worth. It's in this moment that the full scope of the narrative crystallizes, and you realize that all those action scenes and procedures were carefully telling a story, not of a cop and a crook, but of a man losing himself to an obsession. It is a masterpiece of film form, of style as substance, and one of the greatest movies ever made. And if you want to watch The French Connection, either to honor Friedkin's memory or to simply see what all the fuss is about for yourself, well, that's surprisingly more difficult than it should be. Mere months before Friedkin's death, The French Connection was added to streaming service Criterion Channel. Except, something wasn't right. The film introduces its detective duo like normal, chasing down and interrogating a black man, with Cloudy getting cut in the chaos of the action. The next time we see Cloudy, he enters a room, hand now bandaged. Then the film suddenly cuts to Cloudy a few feet ahead, standing with Popeye, who quickly starts talking as the two leave together. Huh. It feels like we skipped something there, doesn't it? Like when a scratched up DVD freezes, then skips ahead a few seconds. The sudden shift in blocking and camera movement is jarring, Popeye's dialogue feels unmotivated, and the overall purpose of the scene is unclear. And that's because the meat of the scene is missing. In the original version of the film, Cloudy walks up to Popeye and the two discuss his injury, with Popeye using the N-word.
How the hell did I know he had a knife?
Never trust a
He could have been white.
Never trust anyone.
Then the two leave together. Also, I realize the irony of censoring this scene from The French Connection in a video complaining about the censorship of this scene from The French Connection. I get it, let's just walk past it. There was no mention on Criterion that the film had been altered, nor were there any other edits made. This is the only missing scene. The motivation for the change is rather transparently the removal of an offensive racial slur, but the source responsible for this edit is less clear. When pressed, Criterion was quick to point out that they had not edited the movie and were streaming the only version that had been made available to them from the film's distributor Disney, The French Connection being one of the many characteristically un-Disney-like movies the corporation acquired when it purchased 20th Century Fox. Indeed, this censored French Connection has also reportedly been screened in repertoire theaters, on Turner Classic Movies, and is the version available to rent through Apple TV+. That would seemingly place Disney responsible for the edit, but the file name for the version available to streamers and theaters is 2021 William Friedkin V2, implying Friedkin either made the change himself or at least approved of it. Several sources attempted to reach Friedkin for comment, but no response has come, and with Friedkin now gone, it's unclear if we'll ever know for sure. Now, on the one hand, there is precedent for Friedkin to alter the French Connection. The director did supervise a 2009 Blu-ray which took massive liberties with the film's color timing, before the 2011 transfer ebbed closer to the theatrical release. Then there's The Exorcist and The Version You've Never Seen Before, released theatrically in 2000 and repackaged as a director's cut in subsequent home video releases. This version most notably added new scenes which had previously been cut, and digitally inserted a demonic face into a handful of shots. Friedkin has not been precious about sticking strictly to the original versions of his films. Even so, though, this French Connection censorship is notably different from either of these examples. This isn't a case of adding new material to a film in a clearly stated new version, nor is it a tinkering with aesthetic qualities, but an unacknowledged removal of material from the original. Material that historically has been important to Friedkin. The man would describe Popeye Doyle in retrospective interviews and commentary tracks as a racist. It seems unlikely Friedkin would suddenly decide to scrub that characterization out. What seems a lot more likely is that Disney themselves removed Popeye's racist remark. That's certainly consistent with the rising trend of older media being re-released in altered forms which cut out potentially problematic material. And it's also consistent with Disney specifically. The company's own streamer has censored the bare bum nudity and splash by digitally extending Daryl Hannah's hair, and removed swear words from Adventures in Babysitting. Not that Disney only started rewriting their history in the digital age. Home video releases of Fantasia have long cut a black centaur out of the movie for conforming to racist stereotypes, while releases of Melody Time have gone back and forth, removing tobacco products in some versions and reinserting them in others. Then there's the controversial legacy of the 1946 film Song of the South, long derided as a racist caricature and bastardized whitewashing of American history. The film has been re-released theatrically as recently as 1986, but has never been made available on any home video format, and likely remains firmly locked up in the Disney vault. Cutting out the N-word from the French Connection is just another in a long lineage of Disney censoring their own library. That sort of self-censorship might have been semi-defensible when the brand was synonymous with children's entertainment, but holds less water today given the vast range Disney movie now covers. It's one thing when there's a risk a child might stumble across minstrel imagery packaged in a happy-go-lucky cartoon from the House of Mouse. It's another when you're talking about movies explicitly made for adults. No one's wishing upon a star in Popeye Doyle's city, and I can't imagine too many tots are cruising the Criterion Channel. Whenever news of old media being censored to better reflect modern standards surfaces, conversation inevitably turns to this disclaimer. This comes from the Looney Tunes DVD collection from the 2000s. It is still the gold standard for contextualizing the offensive qualities of past media in a commercial context. Warner Brothers fully admits the depictions are wrong and have always been wrong, but argues that it's still important to present the cartoons in their original forms. Quote, because to do otherwise would be the same as claiming these prejudices never existed. That last point is really important. There's an instinct to blame these acts of censorship, especially in more reactionary circles, on the vaguely defined woke left, the triggered snowflakes that can't handle being offended. But that anger is misplaced. SJWs don't censor media, corporations do. And they do it for purely business reasons. Erasing racism out of past products makes those products more sellable, and maintains a family-friendly brand image. That erasure is especially salient when we're talking about the French Connection, where Song of the South or the flagged Warner cartoons were ignorantly reproducing the prejudices and bigotry of the era they were made within. The French Connection's use of the N-word is far more deliberate. Put simply, Popeye Doyle being a racist is neither an accident nor incidental, nor confined to a single slur. The character is introduced chasing down a black man, and a later scene has Popeye shaking down the black patrons of a bar. That latter scene starts with Popeye shoving a black man into the room, where he proceeds to search the premises and the patrons. After subjecting everyone to a humiliating search, complete with threats and abuse, Popeye admits in private hardly anyone's actually holding. That whole puffed up display of dominance was just for show, an exercise in pointless harassment. To top it off, the scene ends with Popeye asking his undercover contact where he wants to be hit to maintain his cover. Then hits the opposite side anyway, just because he can. Even as Popeye's enemies shift from black men to wealthy whites, the same streak of hatred and paranoia underlines his actions. Popeye's police work is driven not by justice, but a vindictive anger, evident in his violent outbursts and lack of regard for others' safety. The film frequently depicts Popeye as a bully, the kind of man who revels in his power to force his will on others, the kind of man who gets off on cruelty, the kind of man who shoots an unarmed suspect in the back. And yeah, the kind of man who would use the N-word. Racism may not be the primary focus of the French Connection, but it is a key dimension to the film's overall character study and its portrait of policing. Friedkin draws a direct link between the bigotry that fuels someone to suspect all black men are potential threats, and the obsessive paranoia which motivates Popeye to shoot blindly into the dark. Cutting out the N-word might seem the obviously progressive choice, but in context, the omission elides the racism of the character, softening him into merely an action hero rather than an expression of an unjust police force. Of course, the renegade cop who doesn't play by the rules is a rather beloved archetype. The French Connection may depict a racist character, but how do we know Friedkin isn't just endorsing that person? As luck would have it, 1971 would offer another gritty cop movie that serves as a useful counterpoint. Harry Callahan is a kindred spirit to Popeye Doyle, a plainclothes detective whose surface charms thinly mask an intense obsession and need to punish. Both men also have a negative reputation in their department and generally have empty lives outside of policing. And like Popeye, Harry is also a bigot.
Harry hates everybody. Lime juice, mix, fat, honky.
How's he feel about Mexicans? Especially.
If these two ever met, I suspect they'd share a friendly pint and possibly swap some racist jokes. Despite these similarities, however, each film presents its protagonist in very different terms. You can see it in their introductions. Harry casually enters the film surveying a crime scene, sharply dressed, handsome, and quietly cool. The subsequent debriefing with the mayor is all about confirming Callahan's coolness. The audience directed to identify with Harry's irritation over the lieutenant's repeated interruptions, and to laugh at Harry's sarcastic defense for using violence in the line of duty.
Adult male is chasing a female with intent to commit rape. I shoot the bastard, that's my policy. Well, a naked man is chasing a woman through an alley with a butcher knife and a heart on. I figure he isn't out collecting for the Red Cross.
I think he's got a point.
Popeye, meanwhile, begins the French Connection disguised as Santa Claus and looks positively ridiculous in the ensuing chase. Any notion of cool is deflated rather quickly. The first time we see Harry in action again reiterates his appeal while also conveying his moral certainty, a stoic figure who single-handedly thwarts a robbery while barely moving a muscle. Even in taking a gunshot to the leg, Harry is unfazed. In the scene's defining image, Harry stands over a defeated thug, magnum in hand, daring the crook to go for a shotgun and risk the most powerful handgun in the world blowing his head clean off.
You've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky?
It's pure power fantasy, the direction dripping with awe as the hero towers above his thwarted enemy. Compare this to the French Connection's interrogation scene, where Dirty Harry used clean, clear frames and linear editing to carefully guide an audience through the action. Friedkin's cutting is dynamic and unpredictable, creating an unstable chaos as the detectives begin asking questions. Between Cloudy's relevant inquiries about the suspect's role in the drug trade, Popeye interjects nonsensical questions about picking toes in Poughkeepsie. As the suspect eventually begins to fold, we realize this is a deliberate tactic to gain information. The suspect so confused by Popeye's bizarre questions that he instinctively answers Cloudy's logical ones. But that only becomes clear with time. In the moment, Popeye's line of questioning is as disorienting for the viewer as it is for the suspect. These contrasting scenes get to the core of Dirty Harry as power fantasy and the French Connection as a study of power. Don Siegel's film asks the audience to revel in the strength of its hero cop. Friedkin more cautiously observes, even aligning the film's perspective with Popeye's enemy to best understand the man and his methods. Consider too how the very act of policing is conceptualized in these scenes. Harry is overtly positioned as a defender of the city. He sees a crime occurring and intervenes, stopping the bad guys and preserving the law. Symbolically too, Harry defends a white neighborhood from invading black men. Popeye, meanwhile, disguises himself within a black neighborhood to nail a suspect. He and partner Cloudy Russo are predators, hunting their prey. The film does not outright condemn these actions, mind you. We're led to believe the suspect is in fact a drug dealer, and a viewer may well conclude that such criminality justifies the force used in response. But the film's portrait of policing is inherently duplicitous, while the scene construction frames the police as the chaotic force rather than the ordering one. They are the invaders in this community, and they are the ones who disturb the peace. Where Dirty Harry is unwaveringly confident in its hero's moral virtue, the French Connection's portrait is muddled and ambiguous. This disparity only grows stronger as the films proceed. When Harry shoots an unarmed suspect, it's because he's frantically trying to save the life of a teenager. When Popeye shoots an unarmed suspect, it's out of revenge. Each film concludes with the pursuit of the villain and a culminating act of violence which summarizes the narrative. Popeye's obsessive paranoia finally gets the better of him when, while chasing Chenier, he inadvertently shoots and kills one of his own allies. It is a shocking moment. The film may have elsewhere observed how dangerous Popeye's methods are, but this is the first time real consequences have come from them, and Cloudy is notably shaken. Popeye, however, is undaunted and continues his pursuit. The last shot sees Popeye pushing further into the darkness as the camera lingers behind, like Cloudy, unable to follow Doyle any further. A final gunshot is heard, the film cuts to black, and title cards reveal the aftermath of the case, with most suspects released and Chenier never caught. The crushing failure of this ending is so vast, it casts a shadow of doubt over the entirety of the French Connection. The sum total of Popeye's reckless violence amounts to nothing. None of the perpetrators are brought to justice, and New York's drug problem continues unabated. More than just a story where the good guys lose, Friedkin's denial of easy catharsis questions how good his protagonist really can be. Dirty Harry's ending, meanwhile, is all catharsis. The bank robbery setup finally pays off when Scorpio does in fact feel lucky and Harry gets to blow the bad guy away. Bloodlust is satisfied, and while the denouement where Harry throws his badge into the river might seem contemplative in the moment, the full context of the movie renders it to another validation. This isn't an expression of Harry failing the law, but the law failing Harry. The film has consistently depicted the basic rights of citizens and the regulations placed on cops as obstacles which prevent Harry from dealing justice. Unable to stomach the limitations the law places on his power, Harry rejects it. I mean, he's still a cop in Dirty Harry's 4 sequels, but this first movie ends by literally placing its hero above the law. He is more righteous, more just, and more effective. Both Dirty Harry and The French Connection are about renegade cops who don't play by the rules, but only the former valorizes that persona. Friedkin's portrait may not be a scathing critique of the archetype, but its observances of his destruction, sadism, and the sheer futility of his efforts does openly question the value of such a character. Popeye's racism is part and parcel with that portrait, an extension of a person who views the law not as a shared system of rules, but a tool to be bludgeoned against those who defy him. So, what is there to take away from the censorship of The French Connection? Well, for one, it's that carelessly chopping out the problematic material from old media is in fact regressive, a means to ignore the ugly parts of society and pretend they don't exist. There's also the continued importance of physical media, which became something of a rallying cry when the news first broke. Physical media certainly isn't immune to censorship and alteration, but at least the work is secure once it's yours. No one can re-edit your Blu-rays, but companies can and do pull films from their streaming libraries and replace them with censored versions, often without even acknowledging the changes. Beyond just advising individuals to actually buy physical and not strictly rely on digital to watch movies, the censorship of the French Connection also highlights something bigger and more profound: how precarious movies are in the first place. There's a tendency to think, between the dozens of streamers and the rise of boutique Blu-ray labels, that most everything is available to watch. Yet here we are, talking about a highly influential, Best Picture-winning phenomenon made by a revered filmmaker that is most readily available in an altered state. The film itself is not lost, the negative is still preserved, old DVDs and Blu-rays are still in circulation, and even streamers in countries other than America still play the uncut version. But overall access is limited, and this is especially concerning as streaming increasingly becomes the default way the average viewer watches movies. The virtual extinction of video rental stores is well documented, and anyone who's frequented retailers like Best Buy or Walmart across the last 20 years can describe the gradual shrinking of DVD and Blu-ray sections. More and more movies are becoming available as digital purchases before getting a physical release. And just this summer, Disney announced they would no longer be selling DVDs or Blu-rays in Australia or New Zealand, a practice already active in Latin America and certain Asian countries. Increasingly, the film industry is pushing for a world where all film watching happens through the services of major studios, at the mercy of their control. If the French Connection censorship teaches us anything, it's that these companies should not be trusted with that responsibility.